All right, welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm your host, Caroline Polisi. That was earlier today in Manhattan Supreme Court. Harvey Weinstein voluntarily turned himself in. He has been arrested and charged with multiple counts. I'm joined on set with Law and Crime's own Ronn Blitzer. Ron, welcome to the set. Good to have you here today.
Good to be here.
You're a former prosecutor in the
Yes.
Brooklyn DA's office, so akin to what's happening here. So you have an insider's perspective of what's happening. So just take us through why we're seeing Harvey Weinstein appear in court today, as he is.
Right. So he's been charged with a number of sex crimes. His appearance in court today was his arraignment, where he is being formally charged with these crimes with a criminal complaint. Now, the next step is for the prosecutors to secure an indictment through the grand jury. The grand jury has already been convening. This has been a joint investigation with the DA's office in Manhattan and the NYPD. So the grand jury has been investigating this case, but they're not done yet. They still have not handed down an indictment or a true bill. So there's still a number of potential charges, including, from what it's been reported, possible financial related charges. So once that happens and there is an indictment, then the case will be able to move forward in other stages of the case.
Right. And just so our viewers are aware, according to the New York Times, the forthcoming sexual assault charges against Weinstein stem from his conduct against one of his alleged victims, Lucia Evans, who said that Weinstein forced her to engage in oral sex with him during a meeting in 2004. And Ron, you know, back about a year and a half ago when this story broke, there was a lot of controversy surrounding the fact that Cy Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney, was not able to come up with criminal charges. Remember, we heard that undercover sting operation, the tape recordings of Ambra Badalana Gutierrez talking with Harvey Weinstein and him essentially admitting to sexually assaulting her, to touching her breasts unwantedly, and yet Cy Vance couldn't bring a criminal prosecution. He got a lot of flack for that. So do you think that this is kind of his sort of Hail Mary, sort of an effort to sort of get back into the good graces of the public post sort of the Me Too movement?
I do think that he's hoping that this will win back good graces of the citizens of Manhattan. Do I think it's a Hail Mary? No. I don't think the DA's office deals in Hail Marys typically. If, you know, they must have some pretty credible evidence. They must really believe that these women are credible and have significant evidence to bring these charges and ultimately, hopefully, for them, an indictment. We have two women, so it's not just one case that they're relying on. You have two women here. One case, like you mentioned, it's believed to be Lucia Evans. The criminal complaint does not name names here, but it does say that there was one case in 2004 where Harvey Weinstein allegedly forced a woman into giving him oral sex, grabbing her by the back of the head and pushing her head down. There was another case that is alleged to be in 2013 where he physically kept a woman in a room against her will and had sex with her. According to the complaint, she clearly expressed that she did not consent. So in that case, Weinstein is charged with first-degree rape.
Okay, so then potentially he could be having two separate trials, right? Or would they try these cases together? How would that proceed?
So it's all one complaint, so it's all one case, and it would likely be one trial.
Interesting. And so what do you think, what's going on behind the scenes now? Of course, we know that Weinstein is represented by Ben Brafman, sort of the go-to criminal defense attorney in New York. He's one of sort of the last vestiges of that type of defense attorney. He represented Dominique Strauss-Kahn, that famous case. What do you think the sort of back and forth is happening now between the DA's office and Brafman?
That's hard to say at this point. You know, Brafman has been pretty sparse with any details or comments so far. You know, all he's been really saying is that, you know, Weinstein denies the allegations. He's pleading not guilty. He did mention in court, you know, he served what's known as a cross grand jury notice under CPL 19050 to say that Weinstein may indeed testify before the grand jury. He may not, but he has that option now, and he's notifying the DA's office that Weinstein is considering that, and he'll decide whether or not to do that by May 30th.
What do you see as the strategic advantages of his testimony before the grand jury? Can he choose not to testify?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He does not have to testify. My guess is he probably won't,
right.
Because whatever he says can be used against him when and if this case goes to trial. If he does, it would be in order to try to sway the grand jury to get them to believe that there was no crime committed here. So if he does think that he has a good chance of actually swaying the grand jury and getting this case tossed, then he'll do it. But I think given the allegations and given the number of other allegations, I mean, the grand jurors are not supposed to think about anything else other than these allegations. But I think it'll be pretty tough for him, of all people, to be able to sway them. So I'd be surprised if he goes before the grand jury.
And so not even a grand jury notwithstanding, when you think about going to actual trial in this case, when you think about seating 12 untainted jurors, when you have somebody having been in the news of this extent, can you even get a fair jury pool in a case like this?
They're going to try, and that's a really good question. They're going to do their best. Should this case ultimately go to trial, if they don't reach some sort of plea bargain before then, they'll try to have jury selection process and get 12 jurors who can be impartial in this case. If they can't, as we've seen in other trials in other states that we've covered here in the Law and Crime Network, sometimes judges will send cases to other jurisdictions where...
But that's not really a remedy here.
Exactly, because it's so widespread.
Right.
This is national or international news at this point. So it's not like this is just something that the Manhattan community is familiar with, but people in, say, Ithaca wouldn't. Everyone knows about this. So it's going to be tough, but they're going to have to do their best.
Okay, talk to us about the difficulties. This is not your typical rape prosecution. One of these incidents apparently happened in 2004, one in 2013. We've talked a lot on the network before about the reasons for statute of limitations, sort of the policy reasons, and really the due process concerns associated with having those statutes. But so how is the prosecution going to be able to put forth credible evidence given the fact that these alleged incidents happened so long ago?
So what they're going to do is they're going to use likely testimony from these women and hope that they come across as credible and as having sharp memories of these alleged events. They're going to, I'm sure, try at least to call witnesses who have made similar allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Normally, prior bad acts are questionable when it comes to being evidence in criminal cases, but if they can be used to show that Harvey Weinstein engaged in similar behavior and show a similar pattern that aligns with these allegations, they're going to try to do that. Whether or not the judge allows it remains to be seen.
Right. You can't talk about this case without talking about Bill Cosby, because of course in his retrial, the judge there let in 5 additional character witnesses testifying just to this issue, the sort of MO, if you will, the modus operandi of Cosby to engage in similar assaults, if you will, like the one that he essentially perpetrated on Andrea Constand. So I agree with you. I think that that's going to be sort of a huge issue in this case. We will continue to be covering this development here on the network as we get more and more information surrounding the Harvey Weinstein issue. Right now, I want to show our viewers a preview of a trial that we are going to be covering here on the network next week. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, and a special hello to our Sirius XM radio listeners. We are covering the trial of George Burch. He was on trial for the 2016 murder of a young Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderhayden. Douglas Dietrich, we've been showing you testimony from him. He was Nicole's boyfriend at the time, and the person that the defense is putting forth is actually the murderer. I'm joined on set with Ronn Blitzer. Ron, no spoiler alerts here, okay? But how do you think up until this point Douglas Dietrich is doing on the stand in terms of making a case for him not having been the murderer?
So at this point in the trial, when he's giving his side of the story, he comes across as very credible, in my opinion. He does not seem to be shifty at all. He seems to be very sincere and genuine with what he's saying, talking about his experiences around the time that Nicole disappeared, and talking about his interactions with her over the course of the night. I think he comes across as pretty genuine.
Right. Now, remember, he was the original suspect in this case for Nicole's murder. But I agree with you. The story that he's painting on the stand here is that, it was a late night. They were drinking a lot. Apparently they did get into a fight, so he came home. He had sort of other things to do. He had to take care of their child. I found it a little gratuitous that he mentioned how he took out his contacts and brushed his teeth. Not really necessary, but I guess the suspicion was, why, if you were in such a committed relationship with this person, would you sort of not try to find out where she was? If you're sharing a home together, you have a child together, why you would wait so long to find out where she was. But on the other hand, it sounds like he was incredibly intoxicated that night. He was sort of sleeping it off the next day, and they had gotten into a fight, and maybe she spent the night somewhere else. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, he says that he had been drinking a lot that night. He had gone to multiple bars. He did go to a place where he thought maybe she would be when she wasn't there. He and his friend did drive around a little bit to look for her, didn't find her. He comes home and, leaves well enough alone, thinking, okay, she's doing her own thing, because according to him, she had been sending him plenty of angry text messages over the course of the night. He didn't, according to him, didn't really understand what was going on, but figured, okay, she's mad. Right. I'm not dealing with it anymore tonight.
Right. Let's take another listen to the George Burch trial, to the cross of Doug Dietrich. Remember, he was the original suspect in Nicole's murder. So let's continue that coverage of his cross-examination now. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, and a special hello to our Sirius XM radio listeners. We are recapping the incredibly interesting trial of George Burch in the 2016 trial for the murder of a young Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderhayden. Douglas Dietrich, we just heard from on the stand there, that was Nikki's boyfriend at the time, talking about what happened that evening. Now, the defense in this case, George Burch's defense attorneys, are trying to pin this murder on him. And I'm joined in studio with Ronn Blitzer, former prosecutor. Ron, I got to tell you, I think it might have been Doug Dietrich. What do you think?
I think that it could really go either way, and that's what makes this trial so interesting, because there is plenty of evidence against George Burch, but then he comes out here with a story that seems pretty elaborate, that, oh, no, he was with Nicole, but it was consensual, and then Dietrich caught them and then attacked him and then killed her and made Burch take her body somewhere else to hide it. It seems a little far-fetched, but there is some evidence to back it up. We're hearing from Dietrich now, and when he was telling his side of the story, he was saying how he didn't know what ended up happening to Nicole that night. At least at the time, he didn't know. And he's saying that they had been drinking, and he's saying that she was mad at him. But he doesn't really go into that so much. He acknowledges that she's sending him all these angry text messages, but he's claiming that he's just kind of laughing it off. And he doesn't really go into why she would be mad at him. So clearly there was some sort of tension between the two of them that he's trying to downplay a little bit.
Right, and we know, again, that this was sort of a fraught relationship. They did fight often. They were arguing really about the sincerity of their commitment to each other, to put it in a nice way. But they were thinking that the others were cheating on each other. So we know that sort of the counter narrative here is that Nicole met George Burch that evening at a bar, and they decided to go back to her place to get intimate. And so the theory, this counter theory goes that Doug Dietrich, came upon them in sort of a rage, and next thing you know, Nicole is dead. Do you see that as a plausible, having listened to his testimony here, that could have happened. It could have, right?
It could have happened.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, he doesn't seem like he's lying when he's on the stand. There are some details that he's not really going into, but what he is saying appears to be true when he's saying it here. As the trial goes on, we get some more information, and we'll see how the defense counters, or how the prosecution and the defense each attack this theory. But in my mind, there is at least enough reasonable doubt here where if I'm on the jury, I'm seriously questioning whether or not Burch did this.
Right. Well, we'll have to wait and find out. For our viewers, you won't want to miss sort of the end to this trial. We are going to hear later today from George Burch himself about what happened that night. Very, very interesting. We're going to take a break right now, but we're going to continue our coverage of the George Burch trial when we come back. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Caroline Polisi, and a special hello to our Sirius XM radio listeners. I'm joined on set for an analysis of the George Burch trial with Ronn Blitzer. Ron, we were just talking before the break about this mystery character, Doug Dietrich. I mean, many have commented he's very handsome. He seems very calmly cold on the stand when he's recounting the events of that evening, very methodical about what he did, even in the face of coming home without the mother of his child. He goes about taking his contacts out and brushing his teeth, and doesn't seem too terribly concerned about her whereabouts. I mean, do you think the jury is sort of buying this?
If I was on the jury, what does get to me is his nonchalance as the night progresses. We see, they were in an argument, or at least according to him, she was sending him nasty messages.
Right.
He went to a bar where he thought she might be, didn't find her there, did look for her a little bit, went home, she wasn't home. She had been drinking. You'd think that he would be really worried. Now, he does seem a little concerned in that he asks the babysitter, oh, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? No. So he does talk about efforts that he was making to at least find out some sort of information, but then he goes to sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
So the story Doug Dietrich is telling is that night, of course, they went out, they were partying pretty hard. Nicole apparently just walked off, out of the blue, walked off by herself. He never saw her again. The next thing he knew, they found her body in a ditch. That's not the story that George Burch is telling. He is, of course, trying to pin this murder on Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend, sort of the jealous boyfriend who found George Burch and Nicole together, really getting intimate, and it set him off, and he murdered her. So we are going to hear a little bit more right now from Douglas Dietrich on his cross-examination. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. We're recapping the trial of George Burch for you today on the network. He's on trial for the 2016 murder of a young Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderhayden. Douglas Dietrich, we've been listening to his testimony on the stand. He is the one that the defense is actually saying killed Nicole. He was Nicole's boyfriend, the father of her child, and he was there that night. They went out that evening. They were drinking heavily, and then apparently, according to Doug Dietrich, she walked off, never to be seen again, only thereafter to be found in a ditch. I'm joined on set with Ronn Blitzer. Ron, we're just hearing some news about this Doug Dietrich character, quite a character. He's actually now going to be held accountable for putting in danger the life of Nicole's sister, right? Can you take us through an explanation of what's going on there?
Yeah, I'm still going through the details of this current case here involving Doug Dietrich. But yeah, he is accused of endangering Nicole's sister. Doesn't really look good for him, especially now that we're watching the George Burch trial where the defense is accusing him of killing Nicole.
Right.
And now he's accused of endangering her sister. It's pretty interesting development.
Right, and it sounds like on August 15th, he'll be held trial for second-degree reckless endangering the safety of somebody and false imprisonment for Nicole's sister. Never good for somebody to have sort of prior domestic assault, domestic violence issues in their past when they are being sort of pinned for murder. So we'll have to wait and see how this trial plays out. We're not giving any spoiler alerts for our viewers, but let's stick to the case at hand, the case of this young mother, Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderhayden. So let's talk a little bit more about that night. We just heard some of the text messages that Nicole apparently sent Doug that evening, including, "You abusive asshole," "What bitch are you with?" and an accusation of him cheating on her. And we heard a back and forth between the lawyers there about whether or not it was relevant if Doug had, in fact, cheated on Nicole prior. What do you think? You think it's relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting some pretty charged words from Nicole to Doug Dietrich, accusing him of being unfaithful, which would certainly be the basis for a pretty heated fight between a couple. So there is reason for attention. It could explain why, if he did kill Nicole, what could be a motive. It could be something that was sparked by this fight. It's also evidence that perhaps he did not want to be with her anymore, which could be an additional motive for potentially killing her.
Right. And let's talk about the DNA evidence in this case, because that obviously is going to have a lot of impact on the jurors. Take us through sort of what has been found so far.
Going back in my memory from this trial, but the DNA in this case, it's not entirely conclusive.
Right,
if it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Right.
So, normally you look to DNA evidence to say, okay, this is what happened, this is who's behind it, there's your proof. Unfortunately, it wasn't that simple in this case because you do have such conflicting theories. Right.
I think it's so interesting. In so many of our cases at Law and Crime, we have sort of DNA evidence because juries want DNA evidence, right? It's the CSI effect. Gone are the days, when jurors aren't going to want really hard and fast forensics. But the fact is, just like you said, I mean, there are alternate theories of what happened here, and there could be an explanation for George Burch's DNA sort of being all over the body of this victim, not having to do with him being the murderer.
Especially since he admits to having sex with her.
Right.
So, that explains why, there would be any of his DNA there. So he's not saying, oh, I don't know who this woman is, this entire thing is made up, I had nothing to do with her that night. He's saying, yeah, I was with her that night. We did sleep together that night. Right. But that's all that happened.
Right. And then when you combine that with now these text messages that we're hearing that Nicole sent to her boyfriend at the time, it's not, if at first blush you thought, well, this is a woman in a committed relationship with a child, why would she sort of cheat on her boyfriend? Well, we're seeing there's some at least questionable accusations being lobbed back and forth between this couple about fidelity issues. So it's not that far a fetch to think that maybe she was going to have a one-night stand. She left the bar voluntarily with this guy and really wanted to make her boyfriend jealous.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there is some plausibility to that version of events.
Right. Let's continue on with the testimony of Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's former boyfriend. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm your host, Caroline Polisi, and we are recapping for our viewers the trial of George Burch for you today here on the network. He was on trial for the 2016 murder of a young Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderhayden. Now, Douglas Dietrich was Nicole's former boyfriend. We are listening to him on the stand right now. The defense is saying that it was actually Douglas Dietrich that is the murderer, and we're hearing more and more about really the dysfunctional nature of Doug and Nicole's relationship there on the stand. I'm joined in studio with Ronn Blitzer. Ron, Douglas Dietrich is having some recollection issues, to say the least, on the stand here. His story's changing a lot, seems a little fishy. We heard that back and forth there with the defense attorney saying, you know, so you were never pissed. Pissed is the word that they're using. Was she angry at you that night? Of course, we're hearing about all these sort of malicious text messages being lobbed at Doug, one in which I think is sort of eerily prescient. She called him an abusive asshole. So that can't sit well with jurors.
No, that never looks good for a witness who is being accused by one side of being behind the murder. You know, there are pros and cons during his testimony, as we're seeing here. You know, early on, you know, during direct, you know, he's coming across as, you know, fairly convincing. He doesn't seem like a bad guy at first. He's telling his side of the story. He's saying, yes, she was mad at me that night. He doesn't go into why in particular, but talks about some of the heated text messages. He says that he didn't know where she was. He was looking for her a little bit. He gets home. She's not there. He asks the babysitter if she has any information. She doesn't. Then he goes to bed. But the more he talks and the more he's questioned, especially on cross-examination, the more holes we're seeing in his story, particularly when it comes to what happened after he got home. Because, you know, it's one thing to say, she was mad at me, we were both drinking, we were at different places, and I didn't see her for hours that night. But once he came home and she wasn't there, and then he remained home and went to bed, and she didn't come home, and then he wakes up the next morning, and she still wasn't there, and he hadn't heard from her, wouldn't he be upset about this? Wouldn't he be nervous? Apparently not, because he's saying that he didn't do anything. He didn't reach out to her. He didn't contact her family until hours later. He wakes up. He goes about his day.
Wakes up late, by the way.
Up, yeah,
like
sleeps
10,
late.
10:30.
You know, if I was in his position and I didn't know where, you know, my girlfriend or wife was, I wouldn't be sleeping at all, let alone going to bed, waking up late, and just going about my business. Now, sure, he was probably hungover because he was out drinking a lot the night before. This sort of thing would snap you out of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I agree. It feels like there's something about this story that's not adding up. It feels like he's being defensive, if you will, for a witness on the stand, saying he wasn't, in fact, angry at her that night. Why would she be texting him all of these horrible things if something had not transpired between the two of them earlier that evening? Of course, we haven't heard George Burch's side of the story, and I think that will really round out the picture here for our viewers. That's going to come a little bit later, but first I want to continue playing Doug Dietrich's remaining testimony in this trial. All right, you're listening to testimony from Jason Lemons. He was a friend of the victim in this case, Nicole, and he was with her that night. We are recapping the entirety of the George Burch trial for you today here on the network, and a special hello to our Sirius XM radio listeners. I'm joined in studio with Ronn Blitzer, Law and Crime trial analyst. Ron, what do you think Jason Lemons' testimony does for the prosecution in this case? How does it help them?
Well, now, if you want to say that it helps them, it shows that, you know, when he talks about how he was hanging out with Nicole and she mentioned that she'd get in trouble if her boyfriend saw them talking to each other, that she was sort of joking about it, that she was like playing it off like nothing, and he didn't really take it all that seriously. So if you have the defense saying Dietrich killed her and that he was a jealous boyfriend and that, you know, this was evidence that he was a jealous type, no, he's saying, no, this was just a joke and she didn't really mean anything by it.
Right, but I think it also shows that, you know, this concept, the idea of making her boyfriend jealous, making Doug Dietrich jealous, is on her mind. So it does sort of help the narrative that, you know, she ran into George Burch that night and she maybe was looking for a confrontation with Doug and decided to sort of use the Burch guy as sort of, you know, a way to make him jealous. Say, come back to my house, you know, let's, you know, make out or whatever, and get my boyfriend jealous.
Yeah, if she's upset at him for, you know, accusing her of cheating on him and, you know, saying that, you know, he's jealous, then she could very well have been thinking, oh, I'll give him a reason to be jealous.
Exactly. And we know furthermore that this was on her mind based on the text messages that we heard Doug Dietrich testify about, those really sort of incriminating messages about him being abusive, about whether or not he's with another woman. She knows he's been cheating on her. I don't know. It all sort of it makes sense. Like this is one case where, you know, you have a lot of trials where the defense kind of throw out these crazy theories, like the man from Mars theory, like I didn't do it, but, you know, somebody just dropped down here and that's their only reasonable doubt. This case, it's different than that, right? You have sort of a plausible alternative theory.
Yeah, you have this tension between the victim and her boyfriend, and you don't really know exactly what to make of it, if anything. So, you know, if you want to look at George Burch and say, oh, all the evidence is there that he's the one who did this, and, you know, maybe the tension between Nicole and Doug Dietrich led to her being with him, sure. But at the same time, if you're pointing the finger at Doug Dietrich, you could say, well, at the same time, you know, he's being abusive, so she goes and decides to cheat on him, and then as a result, he kills her. Right. So there's a lot going on here, and, you know, there is information that comes out during this trial, as we're seeing here, that could really play both ways. But as much as some of this can work for the prosecution, the fact that it does play into the hands of both sides, to me, makes it much stronger for the defense, because you're creating reasonable doubt.
Right. And, I mean, we can't forget Nicole Vanderheyden's body was found in a ditch. A woman has died. She was sexually assaulted and found in that ditch later that day. I want to continue playing her boyfriend's testimony. Douglas Dietrich, remember, this is the person that the defense, George Burch's attorneys, are trying to pin this murder on. It's a question of whether or not it was Doug Dietrich or George Burch who committed this murder. So take a listen. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. We're recapping the trial of George Burch for you today here on the network. I'm joined in studio with Ronn Blitzer. Ron, those tears seemed fake. What do you think?
Yeah, not all that convincing. You know, when you're, I mean, I understand, you know, maybe, you know, he decided, oh, you know, I haven't been showing enough emotion up until this point.
Completely devoid of any emotion, in fact, yes.
You know, doesn't show that he was at all concerned about Nicole's well-being at the time that she disappeared. So now he's going to, you know, squirt some tears, but doesn't seem all that authentic here.
Didn't play well.
If anything, he seemed more sincere and genuine when he wasn't showing emotion, because at least, you know, I believed some of what he was telling the court.
Yeah, he was being genuine.
Yeah, but he's losing a lot of that now.
Right.
The jury's watching this, and, you know, first, you know, they're probably questioning why he wasn't more emotional before, and now all of a sudden just a complete turnaround. You know, I don't think they're buying it at this point.
Yeah. Just to recap for our viewers, that was Douglas Dietrich, the former boyfriend of the victim in this case, Nicole Vanderheyden, and the person on which the defense is trying to pin this murder. Crocodile tears never go over well with a jury, so I don't know who was sort of advising him on that front, whether or not his attorney told him, look, you gotta play it up a little bit. You know, the mother of your child is now dead. Show a little emotion, but I don't think it's helping his case at all. I want to throw to a break now, and when we come back, we're going to continue showing recap testimony of the George Burch trial for you today, and we will let you know that verdict by the end of the day. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. We are hearing testimony from the George Burch trial for you today on the network. He is on trial for the 2016 murder of a young Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole Vanderheyden. We just heard there from a Fitbit analyst, expert really on the stand about the Fitbit data from Douglas Dietrich, who is the boyfriend of the victim in this case. I'm joined on set with Ronn Blitzer, Law&Crime trial analyst. Ron, what do you make of this Fitbit evidence?
And so they're trying to use it to show that Dietrich couldn't have been the one to commit the crimes because, the Fitbit tracks how many steps you take, and it's supposed to track your sleeping patterns. And maybe it did accurately, show what he was or wasn't doing at that point. But, I also, as a Fitbit owner.
Oh, you own a Fitbit?
I do.
Okay, I know that.
It's not always accurate. There are times where I'll take steps that it doesn't register. There are times where I have worn it while sleeping, and then I'll wake up to see if it's accurate as far as calculating my sleep, and it's way, way off.
Oh.
So from my experience, I don't buy that this information is necessarily accurate or relevant. At the same time, I think that there is additional evidence that both sides can use in this case. But as far as the Fitbit data, I understand why there was controversy over it coming into play at trial.
Right, right. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but just instinctively, I would think, if one were committing a murder, at least something would show up on your Fitbit, right? It would have to be sort of a physically exerting thing to do to murder somebody in cold blood. It would probably take a lot out of you. You'd probably be moving around a lot, doing a lot of things. Whereas apparently in this time period, there were very few steps registered, very little movement at all registered. Could it be that far off?
Anything is possible. Yeah. We have to remember that Nicole was murdered outside of her home.
Right.
So it's not like it would have necessarily taken a lot of steps in order for this to happen. At the same time, they're claiming that this data shows definitively that Doug Dietrich did not do this. So, as someone who just questions the reliability of these things to begin with, I'm not convinced. But you have an expert here saying, yes, this can be used, and you have a prosecution saying, no, this does it. So if I'm on the jury, it's not really doing anything for me one way or the other, but who's to say about the people who were on this jury?
I have an Apple Watch, which tracks my movement, so I can't relate, so I don't really understand the Fitbit element there. But let's recap for our viewers. We're going to play testimony from Tyler Bailing. He's a computer forensic crime analyst. Pretty interesting stuff that he is going to talk about.
This